Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn, and I run the services at medcommsnetworking.com and the associated websites. So information services, resources, activities, and so on for the global MedComms community, by which I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and the associated businesses. And it is a global business. And these webinars are great because I can get people from all over the world joining in, and we've got a good audience from around the world, but we've also got a panel today from far-flung parts of the world, from my point of view anyway. So thank you very much for joining us. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about medical communications, healthcare communications activity in Asia and Middle East areas, and we've got the regional specialists from AMICULUM, a global agency, to come and talk to us about what's happening in their part of the world. So look, thank you very much for everyone. We're going to have a presentation and an open Q&A. Those of you online today, please be ready to join in with your questions and observations. All being well, this will be recorded and up on NetworkPharma TV later on for anybody who wants to catch up. But without further ado, can I hand over to Khaled? I think you're going to kick us off. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Khaled Musallam. I'm the Global Medical Lead of AMICULUM, and also I look after our business in the Middle East. I'm a medic by training and have still continue to have several academic affiliations in London and the UAE, and personally based in Dubai. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Jenny, who's a co-founder of AMICULUM, and will tell us also a little bit more about AMICULUM for the audience purpose.
Thank you very much, Khaled. And just to say thank you very much for Peter for inviting us to participate in today's panel discussion. I'm Jenny Putin. As Khaled said, I'm a co-founder of AMICULUM. I've been involved in the medical communications environment for about 25 years now, mostly with a particular focus on Asia. Just a quick word about AMICULUM. We're a healthcare communications agency. We were established in the UK in 2001. We now have a global presence. We're in the States, Europe, MENA, Asia, and also New Zealand. If you want to count New Zealand as we see it as part of Asia in many respects. We're about 350 employees now within the business as a whole. And the team that are participating in the panel today, as Peter has said, represents our teams in MENA and Asia. Okay, so I'll hand over now to my colleague Min to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, I'm Min. I'm the agency co-lead for AMICULUM Asia and responsible for commercial side of the business. I have been in medical communications for about 12 years, and I have been in AMICULUM for I think just over 8 years. Yeah, nice to have you in our presentation. So I will forward maybe to Brenda to introduce herself.
Thanks, Min. Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you joining from different parts of the world. This is Brenda Cheong. I'm based in Singapore, and I've been in the digital healthcare communications business for coming on 15 years now, just about half of which spent at AMICULUM. And I head up the digital team here at AMICULUM. But enough about us panelists. Let's get straight into the content, shall we? I think, Khaled, you're going to kick us off, right?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Thank you. Jenny, if we can just move to the first slide. Yeah, thank you. So we thought before we get started, because we've been referring to Asia and MENA, so we wanted to just to clear the terminology, at least for today, because this can get pretty complex. It depends on who's referring to those regions and in what context. Practically speaking, when we're looking at the pharmaceutical industry, which is the main, let's say, client for medical communications business, and how they divide the regions in terms of the teams that they have responsible for the various brands that they have globally, how they structure the teams within the regions. We see different structures, depends on the pharma, some looking at Asia per se, some looking into Asia Pacific, with some pharmaceuticals also looking into having separate entities or units that take care of Russia, China, Japan, or Australia because of the size of these countries or the size of the market in these countries. But also when it comes to the Middle East, we have variation in terms of presence. So it could be Middle East or the North Africa, or Middle East and North Africa, or sometimes the Middle East is lumped with Europe to form the EMEA structure, which is Europe, Middle East, and Asia and Africa. We also obviously have the terms that became more or less common, I would say, in the 10 years or so, which is the emerging markets or growth markets, which is a region that's usually referred to, including Middle East and Asia and Southeast Asia, and sometimes some parts of Africa and South Africa. For AMICULUM, as you probably noticed from us presenting our roles, we do have two official entities or two brands under AMICULUM called AMICULUM Asia and AMICULUM MENA that take care of business in those regions, with offices in Dubai, where I'm based, and also offices in Singapore, Shanghai, and Auckland, where our AMICULUM Asia team is based. For the purposes of the day, let's just think of things geographically. So when we're referring, because we're going to refer a lot to market insights, to healthcare industry presence and insights, we're talking more or less geographically. So without going into the confusion, are we talking about the pharma region or the AMICULUM presence? We're mainly referring to Asia, as in Asia as everyone knows it, and Middle East and North Africa as everyone knows it today. That said, I will hand over to Jenny also to start the presentation looking into the insights from Asia first.
Thank you very much, Khaled. We thought we'd start with just setting the scene for subsequent discussion in more detail about healthcare communications sector in particular. But we just wanted to set the scene with an overview, a top-line overview of some key developments in trends in healthcare. And I'm going to start with the Asia region. I'd just like to emphasize that for some of these areas, we're not necessarily specialists. And the points that we've picked out are sort of partly based on our observations from working in the medical communications sector rather than sort of detailed research in some of these areas in particular. So with regard to Asia, just to start with, in common with many other parts of the world, populations in this region are aging and residing increasingly in urban areas. And these changes are reflected in the greater prevalence of chronic disease and conditions associated with aging. And there has also been a shift towards a more preventative approach in healthcare. It's a spectrum, but we're starting to see that gradual shift. Within the Asia region, there has been substantial investment in R&D over many years, and growing participation of populations and companies from the region in global clinical development programs. We're starting to see, particularly in places like China, emergence of strong local biotech companies that have novel compounds. And we're seeing more partnering with the global pharma and biotech industries in research and also commercialization of new compounds. Governments have also been looking at ways that they can improve patient access to medicines, and implementing various reforms in terms of pricing and reimbursement strategies in common with many other areas in the world. And during my time in Asia, based in Shanghai, one thing that I have noticed is the considerable growth in interest and application of health economics expertise with respect to development and launch of new treatments. In common with many other parts of the world, the patient's voice is becoming more prominent both in healthcare developments and decision-making in Asia. And of course, there is huge interest in how digital technology can be used to advance healthcare and also optimize availability of healthcare information and data across a range of stakeholders in the region. So these are some general trends. One thing that is very important to emphasize with respect to Asia is the diversity in the region. It's not a single homogeneous market, as I'm sure many of you are aware. Culturally, ethnically, and socioeconomically, there are many differences and variations between countries, but also within countries in the region. There's a very wide spectrum of per capita income levels, and this is also linked to a spectrum of within the it's also aligned to the size and targets of healthcare spend in the region, which ranges from below $250 per capita per year in some markets to approaching 4,000 in others. So there's actually a huge range within the region. Healthcare systems varies. We have universal healthcare coverage and with social insurance in some markets such as Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, for example. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are countries where there is still very heavy reliance on out-of-pocket expenditure by patients and external funding. And there are countries where there is a mix of systems. One thing that we wanted to emphasize as well is the use of traditional medicines. For example, traditional Chinese medicine is still used by many patients as a trusted option in many parts of Asia. And this is important for considering how new medicines will be applied in clinical practice, something that healthcare professionals in the region need to take into account when they're thinking about how they might use new therapies in clinical practice alongside traditional remedies that their patients may be taking. And finally, and of course of key importance to the healthcare communications sector, that there are different levels of health literacy and digital maturity and literacy across countries in the region. And Brenda is going to talk more about that in a moment. So I hope that's given you a flavor of some of the developments and characteristics of the Asia region in general. I'm now going to hand over back to Khaled, who's going to talk more about the MENA region. Thanks, Khaled.
Thank you, Jenny. Definitely when it comes to the Middle East and North Africa to MENA, we share a lot of similarities in terms of challenges and opportunities with Asia. That's why both our teams are together on this call, and we do a lot of internal alignment as well in everyday work. Just to give you a snapshot of the healthcare sector in general in the Middle East, starting from the disease picture or the healthcare picture in general, the healthcare delivery itself, the pharma present and research context as it stands today. Similar to what Jenny just mentioned about Asia, there's definitely also a considerable diversity within the Middle East, as much as it's a smaller region per se, but still we see a lot of cultural differences that are driven by many aspects related to natural resources. As you probably know, some regions in the Middle East are more into agricultural resources, some are more into oil and gas. Historic colonization played a key role that we cannot ignore in these regions. It depends on who was here before they had their independence. Was it a French system or was it a British system? And that actually still translates into a lot of the healthcare systems and also into the disease prevalence and admixture of genetic pool as it stands today. So definitely there are some drivers that are unique, and you might see those a lot in the scientific literature refer to the region in specific. There is a high rate of consanguineous marriages, and obviously that determines the genetic pool that is dominant in the region. And there is also unique lifestyle behaviors that could be prevalent everywhere, but probably at higher prevalence in some parts of the Middle East. And again, the Middle East is not only diverse by the inherent population that are already there, but there's a very large migrant population that works in this region. And that's why the genetic mixture, if you are to include patients, for example, in a study, you would see different races and ethnicities being represented. And again, this translates also to different spectrums of diseases and genetic pools. In terms of the healthcare delivery itself, again, that diversity that I mentioned also spans the spectrum of hospital care and resources that are available, which are mainly driven by the economy, the public health policy, and the spending that governments put in different countries on healthcare delivery itself. Coverage options are also might not be as standardized as they are in most parts of Europe, for example. But there are obviously differences between countries, but we do see limitations in those resource limited countries, but also even within resource in countries with high capacity and resources, you see sometimes some differences in terms of coverage for nationals versus expatriates. Definitely there is a trend in the last 5 years or so, even a bit before, to an expanding availability of state-of-the-art institutions. So if you probably, contrary to common belief, if you come to a hospital setting in Dubai here, you'd think you're in one of the top centers in the US in terms of capabilities and infrastructure and equipment that are available. So that scene has been changing dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years or so. And also the talent pool, that's there's a higher number of local let's say students that are going and training and coming back to serve the country here, but also a lot of physicians that are coming from the US and EU and having a home here for their clinical or academic career. One thing that is peculiar here that we always speak of is the medical tourism component. Originally, that has been more of an outward medical tourism. So most of the, let's say, inhabitants of this region usually like to seek care in Europe or in the US, especially for serious illnesses. But that is now changing based on what I just mentioned with the expansion of the hospital scenes and the healthcare delivery. And now we see actually that some cities here are becoming a hub for medical tourism, at least for the neighboring countries at the moment. In terms of the research context or the research infrastructure, I would have to honestly say it hasn't advanced as the clinical scene per se. There is still much to do. There's a lot of competitiveness for the clinical care delivery, so the attention is mostly there more than academia itself, especially also that you don't have the typical large public funds like the ones that come in the NIH or NHS, etc. There is also some disconnect between the universities and hospitals, so that academic hospital setting is not the common scene here. Obviously, I'm talking the general picture, but you see obviously different scenarios in different countries. There are also some challenges with collaboration, sharing of data that most countries are still paving the way through them. But there is definitely a budding infrastructure and regulatory acceptance of the concept of clinical trials and research, and actually interest in that. And I would say that was stimulated also by the recent COVID-19 pandemic, where the whole world, I think, acknowledged the importance of research and being part of clinical trials. So that's also being the case here. And lastly, when it comes to pharmaceutical activity and presence, usually there are dedicated offices, as I mentioned in the beginning, for the Middle East and North Africa regions with on-ground teams, mostly based in Dubai, but it could be in Saudi as well if it's regional offices. There is definitely a very key essential role for pharmaceuticals. They partner a lot with private and public sectors here, and they have an essential role of bringing a lot of international standards into the actual local scene. In terms of drug manufacturing, I wouldn't say there's a lot of pharma presence in that sense, but that's not actually the case at the generic drug manufacturing, where you do have very known hubs of generic pharma that are available in the region and very highly active. So that's the snapshot of the Middle East, and hopefully we'll discuss further on what's specific to the MedCom sector here. And I'll hand over to Brent to also walk us through some digital insights.
Thanks very much, Khaled. Right, so as you've heard from Khaled and from Jenny on the many diversities and the many similarities with regards to the healthcare landscape across Asia and the Middle East. One of the common threads that runs across both regions is that of digital disruption. Of course, this applies across the world, yes, and very much accelerated by the pandemic. But I'd say in these regions in particular, with factors such as physician shortage and patient empowerment, coupled with a rapidly growing population, tech, digital literacy, and the pace of digitalization in other sectors like fintech, etc. These are ideal conditions for a perfect digital disruption storm, would you not say? Now, when we come to digital, there's a lot of hype, right? So with all the hype around digital trends in healthcare communications, what are some of the key trends influencing MedCom approaches in the region? From our experience, of course, the list is not exhaustive. Otherwise, we'll be here for 3 hours and Peter will kick us out, and that's not good. But we just wanted to share from our experience over the past 4 or 5 years. We have seen an uptake in adoption, especially in these 2 areas. Let's talk about them. Number 1, solutions powered by tech, not to replace, I highlight, not to try to replace physical interactions, but to bridge the distance in virtual interactions. So we use interactive whiteboards, right, to mimic real life meeting rooms. We use virtual reality or augmented reality applications because we want to create a more immersive virtual ad board. Before any of you ask me to comment on Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse utopia or dystopia, I will not comment on that. We create digital outputs like posters enhanced with interactive video content, or throw in a bit of fun, a bit of online gamification to train on telemedicine best practices, for example, right? So these are just some examples of improving that engagement where face-to-face interactions are either not possible or limited for whatever reason. That's the first area. The second area, customized content. We have all heard, and we are probably victims of this. We have been flooded with over-information. Peter was just talking about all the videos that he has sitting in his folder structure to watch. So a lot of over-information. Digital fatigue is real. Indeed, this is even more so for time-poor healthcare professionals. So taking an omni-channel personalized approach is not just the new pharma buzzword, but it's a very real motto. So there is now more than ever this increased need to be able to deliver the right content to the right audience at the right time through the right channel. Personalized emails, AI-powered chatbots to serve up on-demand information. And once again, tech is your friend. Tech is here to help serve up deep customer insights via big data, to help with via predictive analytics, to help recommend what your next best action in terms of customer engagement should be. Pharma is definitely starting to pay attention to these, and so should we. Of course, at the start of this session, a lot of you started typing where you're dialing in from. We have a lot of folks from, I think, the US, the UK, different parts of the world. And I appreciate a lot of what I'm saying applies to your regions as well. Yes, but bringing it back to Asia, bringing it back to Middle East, I'd say from my experience, one interesting thing that we've seen from some of the global work that we have done and are doing is that some of the best-in-class digital models are coming from markets like China, Korea, Turkey, that are inspiring even US and Europe regions. And in these successful cases, of course, local insights on the ground knowledge is super important. Understanding and implementing locally relevant channels is the key to success. What about MENA in Middle East? A common barrier to digital adoption that we get on a daily basis is that, yes, healthcare professionals still prefer face-to-face communications. Sure, that is great. But as I mentioned moments ago, we are not talking about a competition, all right? Not a competition of digital versus non-digital approaches here. Instead, we are talking about how to use digital to add value, to personalize the overall customer engagement experience. And that, my friends, is how you win at the healthcare communications game. I think that's all I wanted to say on this slide for now. I'll chip in later on, but at this point in time, let's talk a little bit more about Asia. So I'll pass on to my colleague Min to tell you a little bit more about the changes in the MedComms area in Asia. Min?
Thank you, Bren. So my colleagues have talked about the trends and developments in healthcare in Asia and the diversity in the region and the sort of the digital evolution that is happening. So from the perspective of an agency that has been in the region for almost 15 years, so next, we would just like to share some of our observations on the changes in medical communications environment in Asia. So I'm going to start with the increased importance of local factors. So recognizing that one size doesn't fit all. So we have seen some pharma companies reorganize to take a global directly to local structure, and the functions of their regional teams have contracted. So as a result, there have been increased needs in local affiliate markets and increased needs for agencies with local market experience. In China, there's a demand for full spectrum of medical communication services because of the size of China market and the pharma functions it requires. Singapore and Southeast Asia are important markets in the region, and we have seen the needs growing there as well. Japan and Korea are unique markets. Pharma companies there still prefer to work with their in-country agencies and deliver work in local languages. Despite the growing importance and needs in these local affiliate markets, well, we still see the local budgets remain kind of very slim and not very generous. With regards to HCP engagement, although these local HCP activities become kind of more and more important, I think there's still a need for regional activities for the HCPs to share their best practice and address common needs in the region. Well, whether the activities being local or regional, we have seen a shift from large face-to-face meetings to virtual events, or like my colleague Brenda just talked about, like what is happening everywhere else in the world. And this has certainly been kind of accelerated by COVID, as we probably all know. Well, however, for some HCPs and in some markets, face-to-face communications is still preferred as a platform for networking and for experience sharing among the peers and for doctors to share with their seniors. So we are kind of predicting more hybrid type of meetings kind of post-COVID when that time finally comes. The last obvious point on this topic is the increased digital interaction with HCPs, and omni-channel engagement has become a buzzword. And I'm sure my colleague Brenda will probably comment on this later. And next, kind of in responding to what Jenny talked earlier about the rise of local biotech companies and greater research and development efforts, well, in Asia and by some of the pharma companies. And there has been an increased requirement for support earlier in the drug development process, or when the product is still at clinical trial stages. So for example, supporting companies with development of publications plan and execute publications. And in China, we have seen the investigators now much more prefer to publish their research findings in high impact international journals than the local journals. Well, because of the accelerated kind of new drug approvals in some countries, and we have seen greater need for local access, market access support, or to help get these new products to patients. And we also talked earlier about the shift of patients' role, and we have seen companies putting a greater emphasis on kind of engaging patients in every stage of drug development and providing patients with the knowledge and the tools for shared decision-making. And more often, we have seen the communications programs of pharma companies or have included experience sharing by patients or their family members as a key part in their programs. Well, patient advocacy groups keeps playing an important role in empowering patients and in interacting with pharma companies and policymakers to make the patient's voice heard. Last but not least, I just want to talk about rare diseases. And it's very good to see that pharma companies are putting in more and more investment and effort in the rare disease space. Well, the gaps around rare diseases in the region are, I probably like some other regions in the world, are mostly around awareness, knowledge, and treatment options. So we have seen public awareness and education campaigns run by the pharma companies, to increase awareness, and we've seen medical communication programs to improve HCP's clinical expertise and their experience around management of rare diseases. And because many countries in Asia have kind of pro-rare disease and pro-orphan drug policies, so there have been accelerated approval of more rare disease treatments in the region. So therefore, there is an increased need in supporting launches of new rare disease products. I think I've covered some of the areas of my slide. Now I'm just probably going to pause here and then probably hand it over to my colleagues, Brenda and Khaled, to comment or add on some of the points and I've talked about, and probably share medical communications context from MENA region.
Not to comment or anything, you've covered it all, but I guess, when it comes to patient engagement, you talk about sharing of experiences, right? So I think one thing that we've also noted is there's a lot of experience sharing of patients or caregivers on social media channels. So patient support groups on Facebook or online patient advocacy fora. So with that, what implications does this have? Our observation is that the regulatory, the compliance role then in pharma becomes even more critical, right? To ensure guidelines are being adhered to. We're also seeing pressures put by pharma on compliance and regulatory colleagues to try to be a bit more understanding to the needs of the business. Maybe in the past, they would have been being conservative compliance teams. Maybe they would shut down an idea about social media right from the get-go. But now, because there is an increasing business need when it comes to engagement, both patients but also other stakeholders, they are listening, and their role is, in my experience, becoming even more critical these days. That was all I wanted to add. Thanks, Min. I think Khaled, you're next, but yeah, you might be on mute.
Sorry for that. Definitely for MENA, as I mentioned about the whole healthcare structure and infrastructure similarities to Asia, same thing applies to MedComms, but I would say that the MedComms business itself is probably newer to the region compared to existence of several providers within Asia. And I'd like maybe to speak about three pillars of that, or three elements of that: the pharma itself and associates that work within them, the key opinion leaders or HCPs in the region, and again, the main projects that, let's say, persist or exist here. As for the pharma, there's various categorization again structures for individual pharma, depends on historic presence in the region, but usually you'd see some clusters of looking into the Levant region, with or without Egypt, or North Africa, being Egypt, including also the far part of North Africa within Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. But then you have the Gulf Council countries, which sometimes are inclusive of Saudi, but sometimes Saudi, because it's a big market, it's also dealt with separate offices. But again, there are obviously usually the MENA office of any pharmaceutical company here, and it's usually based in Dubai. The functions that you would see here represented in such regional offices are the typical medical affairs, marketing, market access, patient relations. So your usual medical manager, marketing managers. This is usually probably common across pharma here. I would say from experience, the functions that are probably less represented are clinical development and HEOR. Although for some pharmaceuticals, they do have some teams established here, but simply because that the presence of clinical trials within the region is still at a minimum. That's why you wouldn't need probably clinical development teams as you would need them to be in Europe or in the US. One thing that we face a lot here is transition of pharma associates. There's a lot of horizontal movement across brands between pharma, but also there's always this transition towards bigger region or global teams. This is something that's probably across all sectors, not only pharmaceutical sectors, that many individuals would like to join corporations, global corporations and regional offices, but then there are aspirations obviously always and hopes to be maybe promoted or to move into global counterparts of this within the same company. And that is very common for the pharmaceutical sector per se. One thing I must say is that our business per se is not always known. Sometimes the medical communications providers or services are mixed with event management or advertising. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time to actually orient the clients to what we do to begin with before going ahead and talking about our services. Something that's probably not surprising that when you talk about smaller region with not all countries have adequate resources. So even that translates to the businesses that exist within them. So the budgets that we see here that are dedicated to any medical communications activities or services are usually lower than they are in global counterparts. And there is luckily for us as AMICULUM, there is always a trust in foreign companies with existing business regional offices in the region. That is something historic, but I'm happy to see that more and more local companies are also starting to emerge. But currently, the majority of presence here is for international companies with local branches or subsidiaries. When it comes to key opinion leaders, just to sum up the points that I have here on the slide, they control the scene in a good way, obviously, in terms of healthcare story for any diseases. There is a lot of high respect here to established physicians, whether it's from their peers to listen to their guidance, whether it's official guidance or just peer-to-peer guidance. Most of the decisions that are made at the level of ministries of health in terms of guidelines for management or reimbursement are also never come through without consultations with the key opinion leaders in the country, because they know the disease and the patient needs the best. But unfortunately for these KOLs, that they're always busy because they have a lot of administrative responsibilities within the country as well. And probably the busiest clinics, it's always a hurdle to communicate and to have availability or capacity to be part of medical communication activities or pharma activities in general. We do also have in the region international or global KOLs, especially when it comes to rare diseases that are mostly prevalent here. And definitely there's a lot of, as it is everywhere, there's a lot of politics that we as a business need to always be aware of in terms of seniority of KOLs, how to consider interactions and communications, roles on project. For example, if you have an advisory board, who would be the chairperson, who would be a speaker? There is that level of attention to seniority and historic engagement with a certain physician, in parallel to also focusing obviously on their scientific background and interest. Finally, just to finish on the projects pool that we're always also mostly dealing with here, as Brenda mentioned, there's a lot of attention to face-to-face engagement. Most of the work that MedCom agencies that deal with here are events, whether they're educational events or advisory board. That's why obviously the COVID, when it came with all the restrictions, affected the pharmaceutical activity considerably here. While when it comes to, for example, medical materials or educational materials, usually these are developed by global pharma team and handed over to local teams. So mainly it's a matter of adaptation of those to the region, whether it's a language adaptation or content adaptation. And the publication support that you would see from medical communication agencies here probably would be usually at a minimum, simply based on what I mentioned in the beginning, that the research activity, it's still not that vast and not that available in all countries. Maybe few countries in the region are very highly productive, but that's not the case for the region as a whole. And that's the same for clinical trial activity. It's increasing, it's expanding. You see more phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials happening, but mostly the region is more involved in later stage development trials like phase 4 or registries, where a global real world evidence picture needs to be established. That's it from my end for MENA. I will hand back to Min to also go over some implications of everything that we said to medical communication agencies in general, and we will also pitch in with any further ideas.
Thanks, Khaled, certainly. So now we have talked about what the pharma companies are focusing on under the medical communications context in Asia and in MENA. So with this last slide, please, next slide. Yeah, we just would like to share what all these mean for agencies. Okay. Thanks, Jenny. So, well, since pharma companies are putting efforts on all fronts, that being kind of omni-channel communication or patient engagement, rare diseases, and so on. So this certainly requires agencies to diversify our services and equip ourselves with the expertise in all these areas. It also requires closer team collaboration and for us being able to put together an effective team with all the experience and expertise needed for supporting the clients in these diversified areas. And while pharma companies often ask for innovative ideas, and some of them are very keen on innovative digital approaches, but what we think is most important is to propose to client what is fit for the purpose and to focus on communicating the right content to the right audience through the right channel, just like what my colleague Brenda talked about earlier. And related to the first point, agency teams, we must be agile. We need to be flexible. We need to embrace all the opportunities to work on different types of projects and different types of service areas. Well, that includes kind of developing skills developing skills in digital and virtual services. While strong client service ethos and people skills are, as always, very essential in working with pharma companies as clients. We also talked earlier about the increased needs in local medical communication services, and to respond better to that, agencies will need to develop strong understanding and clinical knowledge about the key local markets. Well, working with local team often involves greater commercial focus because at the end of the day, sales numbers are still the main parameter for affiliate markets to measure their success. And the local projects are often ad hoc and with very tight timelines. Well, yet they demand high quality service and deliverables. Well, that is something that we need to adapt to, and the team need to keep working on our own process and efficiency probably. And to be able to do all these we just talked about, we need to attract talents and ideally candidates with broader expertise, multiple skill sets and understanding of different markets. But they are rare to find. And we are also competing with pharma companies and some other agencies for talents from a very limited pool. Okay, I think these are just our sharing, and that's the end of my slide. So I will probably again invite probably some of my other colleagues to add or comment to see if they have anything to share from their points of view.
You want to start?
No.
If not, and then probably I'll hand over to Jenny to close the session and invite questions.
We're not hearing you, Jenny, at all. Sorry. You're not muted.
Is that better? Sorry.
Yeah, I think your plug had
Okay.
come out.
Sorry, I was just saying that I'm having problems advancing the slides, but the last slide is really just to say a thank you to everybody for joining the presentation today, and we're looking forward to having a lively discussion next. It's been a great pleasure for us, and we're very happy to share our experience from the region. On the last slide, which I will look forward to if I can, a couple of contact addresses for Khaled and Min. I will share that in a moment if I can, but otherwise to say that I think that's it from us, and we're looking forward to answering any questions and to having further discussion.
Okay, cool. I'll jump in there. Sorry, and we are over time, so we're going to have to just keep this sort of Q&A very brief, I must admit, which always frustrates me a little bit. But can I say to the audience, if you've got any questions or comments, use the text boxes to send them to us. Even if we can't answer them now, it's just very useful to see the comments that are coming in. I mean, it struck me as you were talking, guys, there's an awful lot of ground we covered there, and frankly, we just need a lot more time. And maybe I can bring you back another time, and we can go into some more detail on some of those things. But huge thank you to you guys. I personally, I've never worked directly out in your sort of region, so I've seen it from afar. So it's been interesting to hear what you're saying. I just thought I would just try and wrap. Maybe it is just a question of wrapping this up. But as I say, audience, if you want to send some questions in, we'll collect them. I am sort of interested in maybe what Anonymous is talking about here. I mean, traditionally, and when I was in MedComms, if we were supporting projects in your sort of regions, it would be sourced from over here. How important? You've obviously grown up and evolved to have local offices. And I guess your basic point is going to be it's important to have local offices, but you're in a very fragmented marketplace, aren't you? As you've both said, as you've all said, the region is still a makeup of lots of local regions. So where do you draw the lines? I just wonder whether you can comment, and maybe Jenny at an overall sort of level of the AMICULUM family, as it were. What do you see in terms of resourcing, and how are you coping? How much are you able to draw other people in from elsewhere in the world? How much of it has to be done locally? But what does locally mean? Because locally in Dubai is not locally in lots of the parts of the region that you work. Do you see what I'm saying? We're going to have a couple of minutes on this, but can you just talk a little bit about this from the point of view of how it's working as an agency to support this region from those sorts of points of view?
Certainly, yes. I mean, we use a mix. We have our local teams, which we've built up over the last 14 years in Asia. MENA's is a slightly shorter period of time. I think it was about 2016, 17. If I remember correctly. But we have always relied to a greater or lesser extent on support from the wider business, particularly in the early days when we were setting up. We had a very, very small team. Initially, it was just myself in the region. So we were working with the small team, working with the clients in a sort of client-facing role, but then we were drawing on colleagues elsewhere in the business, for example, to provide additional medical writing support, design support, digital in the early days before we had our team in Singapore. So we've always involved a lot of collaboration with wider teams, because it's very difficult to build the expertise in the region. I mean, it takes a long time. That the talent pool is quite small, and it's taken time for the MedComms talent pool to grow over the years as well. So we've always had to rely extensively on support from the wider team. We can't work in, I mean, we have particular markets where we feel more comfortable working. We don't work or pretend to have presence or local knowledge of every single market in Asia. That's just impossible. But the key, we have got a team in China, which was our original base, and that's an important and increasingly important part of our business, as well as in other hubs like Singapore and Hong Kong, etc. And so we work with many of our client teams from those main
hubs.
Does that help to?
Yeah, no, I'm sure there's a whole load we could go into there, but
yes.
It's increasingly important. The message I'm getting is, and you have evolved that way, so it's a little bit chicken and egg, but it's increasingly important for you to have local people in local regions. And for instance, the question came in about having multi-language skills and things that must just come with the course sort of thing. But it's difficult by definition. So, the global nature of the business and the fact that you can bring in resources, especially because of the technology and so on, must play to your advantage there. Khaled, did you want to say something on the MENA side specifically, or it looked like
So
you were trying to
definitely, I
jump
think
there?
in terms of one thing, in terms of the availability of local talent, obviously, as you know, in our business, at least at the editorial side of things with medical writing and so on, most of the candidates come from somehow specific background in science, in master's program, PhD programs and such, and some of also from MDs. But these programs aren't as abundant, obviously, in the region as they are in Europe. So most of our actually people go to Europe to do a PhD or go to the US, and some of them that come back to MENA are probably candidates for us, but many stay abroad for a while, at least in the earlier part of their career, and they'll be more likely to be recruited by MedCom agencies in Europe or the US than they are in agencies here. That's why sometimes we rely on bringing people into the region from Europe. Some people like the cultural diversity here. They want to come spend some time in Dubai, at least for a few years into their careers. So we do see interest, to be honest, for many people from the UK, especially, and from Europe in general, that are interested to come to the region for various reasons per se. Okay, and just as a general comment from my point of view, I mean, MedComms is seen as very much a sort of UK, US, European sort of speciality. So, one of the things that interests me about this sort of conversation is we're trying to highlight the fact that there's regional activity, Asia, MENA, and so on. And actually, you are looking to recruit people, and people should be looking to agencies like yours for opportunities, sort of thing. So, I guess that's just a simple but important message to get out there. And we are way over time. So, guys, I'm going to call a halt there. Those of you watching us in the audience, you can hang around. We're here for another few minutes, but we are going to stop at the top of the hour. So, but I'm going to stop. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. As I say, I think there were lots of things we could go into much more detail about, maybe on another occasion. I would encourage people to come, sit, watch the video, and importantly, to follow up with you individually via LinkedIn. That's the easy way to do it. I know you're all very happy to hear from anybody. So please, anyone watching this or today or watching the video, please make the connection. So huge thank you. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to ask you all to say goodbye with a little wave. I'll stop the recording, and audience members will still be here for a few minutes. So bye, and thank you very much. Look after yourself in this very strange times. Bye bye.